Right, I'm going to talk about international law. The states of the world live in a community. They have to have relations, obviously. These relations are regulated by international law. As I said in the beginning, in the first lesson, in why we have rules, we want to know how to behave. The states must know how to behave, who's in the right, who's in the wrong, what's their duties, what's their rights, etc., etc. Because if, for example, Italy wants to fish in that water, does it have permission? Or maybe, I don't know, another state will challenge this and say Italy can't fish in that water. So there has to be rules to establish these behaviours. Now, these rules, the big problem in international law, there's no policeman. So it's very difficult to enforce these rules if a state doesn't respect these rules. The state can bring another state to the International Court of Justice, and that International Court of Justice can judge a state in the wrong, but that state may not repair the damage, may not do what it should do, and there's no real policeman in the world to stop this. But every state wants a reputation, because every state must enter into relations with other states and to find opportunities, in business, in political cooperation, in social cooperation, etc. So, states generally want to respect international law because they value the trust and their reputation and their identity with the other states. And if they don't have a good reputation, they know they will lose out in many ways. The real problems are the very big, very powerful states like America and Russia, who really can afford, because they're more in control than other states, they can afford to violate and ignore international law more. But even those states do want to give a good example and to have the trust of other states, because they need cooperation in many ways. So, since every state is sovereign, which means it controls its territory, can do what it wants on its territory, international law must be legislated in the national judicial system. So international law, if it's established, does not apply automatically to a country. It needs to be legislated in that country, in all the countries that it applies in, before it can actually become a reality. So, the international judicial system mainly regulates the relations with states, between states, not relations between all the states and citizens. So that's an important point. It doesn't apply internationally. Now, the first thing to ask about international law in any system is, where are the sources of law which are the sources which can create and legitimize the rules. In international law, we have several sources, one of them being international treaties. International treaties are agreements between two or more countries. So obviously they're reciprocal agreements. So they're agreements and both parties must agree, or all parties, if it's more than two, must agree on these. So there's this principle of reciprocity in international law, where the countries agree to the international law. And when a state makes a treaty, that becomes international law. That's very difficult for a country to get out of unilaterally in just using its national juridical system. It can't exit. It needs the agreement of the other states that are in this international treaty. These international treaties can be just free trade agreements, agreements of trade and tariffs, or they could be maybe agreements to create organisations, international organisations like the European Union, based on, that's based on treaties, or the United Nations is just a treaty between nations, or the World Trade Organization is the GATT treaty. So it can create these organizations, international organizations, or maybe they're to resolve a problem. For example, the environment. In the Paris Agreement, many countries entered into this pact, this treaty, these international treaties, with objectives for pollution. They all agreed on that level, and they must do it because that's the international law, and they need to show they're not violating international law, so they must respect it. Or maybe it's for mutual interest. Like I said, free trade agreements are treaties. So two countries will negotiate and come to an agreement on, tariffs, etc., to do trade. Another source is international traditions, consuetudini in Italian. So if a country always has that tradition or that habit, and that's not resisted by other states, maybe it always fishes in those waters, and no other states resist this and tries to stop this practice, after a while it becomes international law. It's accepted as the law. In the Antarctic now, there's a lot of glaciers melting, and many countries like Canada, Russia, America, they're all trying to go there and establish themselves there, because there's all these opportunities. If they establish, maybe searching for oil or something, they establish themselves there, they can create international law. They create facts on the ground, we should say. Facts on the ground means, they will create the reality, and then that becomes the accepted, legitimized, shall we say. Another source of international law are sentences of the International Court of Justice. When the International Court of Justice interprets a law or makes a decision in any way, that is legitimized as international law. Another one would be legal acts of international organizations like United Nations, or European Union, they can make legal acts which apply to their members and become accepted as the law above the nations.